and agreed each year with COSLA on behalf of all their local authority members. The formula uses the most up-to-date information for the full range of indicators, including population. The 2024-25 local government settlement will utilise the latest population census published on 14th of September. The 2023-24 local government finance settlement provides East Lothian Council with an additional £8.1 million for vital day-to-day services. Mid Lothian Council have an additional £6.7 million compared to 2022-23.
Colin Beattie.
The current funding model, which allocates a larger share of resources to areas experiencing population decline, presents a challenge to regions.
So all else being equal, this means that councils with...
Christine Graham for a brief supplementary, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I add my concerns to those of my colleague Colin Beattie, as I represent Mid Lothian South, with substantial population growth in Gorebridge, Pennycook and Newton Grange? And can I welcome the Minister's answer that and I appreciate it's to do with COSLA agreeing this, but the distribution model does need revisited.
Minister.
I'm not sure there's much I can add to my previous answer, but I'll reassure the member that we are working within our population strategy to support our local government partners to cope with increasing population as well as declining population across Scotland.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions. Question number 1. I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I remind the Chamber that my wife is a serving police officer. Serious failures in the SNP's centralisation of Police Scotland contributed to tragic deaths on the M9 in 2015. The deaths of Lamarabelle and John Yule were a tragedy that the Government vowed would never happen again. But this week, David Kennedy of the Scottish Police Federation said this: "We might see more M9 cases appearing, where people actually die. That's a harsh reality if there are not enough police officers." Under the SNP, police numbers have fallen by more than 700 since the creation of Police Scotland. How much lower will Humza Yousaf let them fall?
First Minister.
First and foremost, Presiding Officer, my thoughts remain with the families of Lamarabelle and John Yule, affected, of course, by that tragic incident on the M9 in 2015. Douglas Ross, we are investing in our police service. That's why we've invested £1.45 billion this financial year. That's an increase in the resource budget of £80 million. And let me remind Douglas Ross, as the SNP-led Scottish Government has increased police numbers, it was his party in 2010 to 2019 that decreased police officer numbers in England by almost 19,000.
Douglas Ross.
I mean, it was a very simple question. How low will Humza Yousaf let the police officer numbers fall in Scotland? They have fallen by 700 since the creation of Police Scotland. And he speaks about investing. Well, the Scottish Police Federation said this: if the Scottish Government properly funded the police, then it wouldn't be bleak. But they are choosing not to. Not my words, but the words of the Police Federation. And at the recent Scottish Police Authority meeting, Police Scotland officers described the cuts that they need to make as slash and burn. Deputy Chief Officer David Page said this: "It used to be every pound as a prisoner, now it's every penny." That's why Police Scotland have been forced to launch a pilot where many crimes won't be investigated. I've previously asked the First Minister to come clean about which crimes would be overlooked, and he refused to answer. So will he now finally publish the full list of crimes that police in Scotland won't investigate?
First Minister.
Douglas Ross says that public services across Scotland are facing funding pressures. Of course they are, because of his party's economic mismanagement of the public finances. Of course, an economic mismanagement, a torpedoing of the economy that Douglas Ross demanded that we copy. Thank goodness we ignored him, much like the people of Scotland continue to ignore Douglas Ross day in and day out. On the substance of the issue in relation to Police Scotland, let me make it clear once again to Douglas Ross that under the SNP-led Scottish Government we have more bobbies on the beat compared to England and Wales. We have increased funding for Police Scotland by an additional 6.3% in terms of their revenue. And of course, what is important to people is ensuring that their communities are safe. And that's why, under the SNP-led Scottish Government, recorded crime is at one of its lowest levels in almost half a century. 41% decrease in recorded crime that we have seen since the SNP has been in government. So I'm not going to take lectures about the public finances from Douglas Ross when his party are the ones that have completely decimated this economy and decimated the public finances of this country.
Douglas Ross.
Another very straightforward question that the First Minister should be able to answer, but refuses to do so. And it's not just police officer numbers that have been slashed. And this is important because the First Minister just said it's important that communities feel safe. Well, we learned recently that SNP budget cuts mean that police will have to close a further 30 stations across Scotland. Now, that's understandably causing a lot of concern in local communities who want to know if their police station is safe or not. So will Humza Yousaf be upfront and honest with people today, right now, about policing in their local community and tell us which stations will be closed?
First Minister.
First and foremost, this is not news, of course, that Police Scotland published a document around their estates in 2019 giving details of where, for example, they would seek to replace some of their estate that was being underused. And the reason they, of course, have done that is because for modern policing purposes, it can often make sense to co-locate with partner organisations in modern, well-equipped accommodation. But what people in Scotland are interested in is are there more bobbies on the beat under the SNP government? There absolutely are. And in comparison to Conservative-led England or Labour-run Wales, we have more officers per head. They want to know whether or not crime is reducing. And under the SNP government, crime is at historically low levels in comparison to the last 50 years, and 41% down since we came into power in 2007. And they also want to make sure that the police officers are being paid well. And I'm pleased to say that because of a recent acceptance of a very fair offer to police officers of every single rank are better paid here in Scotland than they are paid in Conservative-led England. So what I'll say very, very clearly is that we'll leave the operational decisions to Police Scotland, but people right across Scotland should be in no doubt whatsoever that their communities are safer because of our investment and the SNP's investment in Police Scotland.
Douglas Ross.
Well, the First Minister flipped through his folder a lot there, but couldn't find an answer, which seems to be the only thing constant in this session, because Humza Yousaf is forcing Police Scotland to close dozens of stations, but he won't say where. He's leaving them with no option but to stop investigating every crime, but he won't say which crimes. And he's forcing the police to cut officer numbers to the lowest level on record, but he won't say how low. Now, for a First Minister that loves the sound of his own voice, it seems quite stark that he is silent when it really matters.
Members.
Silent on all of these questions.
Let's hear Mr. Ross.
Let's just be very clear. Humza Yousaf is a criminal's dream. He doesn't want them stopped, he doesn't want them caught, and he doesn't want them in jail. Why is he being so sly and sleek-it and secretive about the consequences of the SNP's cuts on Police Scotland?
I think Douglas Ross is just jealous because nobody likes the sound of his voice, I'll tell you, presiding officer. Let us. I know the Conservatives are in their post-truth stage. Yeah, exactly. A government that is a UK government that is out of ideas, and I hope out of time very, very shortly. But let's stick to the facts, because the facts tell us this: that there are more officers per head in Scotland than in Conservative-led England and Labour-led Wales. Crime is down under this government.
Hear the First Minister.
Officers are paid more fairly, in fact are the best paid in the entire UK. So I know Douglas Ross, despite having 3 or 4 or 5 jobs, I've lost count, presiding officer, was down at the Conservative Party conference this week, or as others have rightly dubbed it, the Conspiracy Party Conference. His post-truth, his lies about the police service, simply will not wash here in Scotland, presiding officer.
First Minister, as all members are aware, it is wholly inappropriate to suggest that another member of this Parliament has lied, and I would be grateful, First Minister, if you might apologise.
I'm happy to call it a deliberate inaccuracy, Presiding Officer, because that's clearly what it is.
First Minister, I must ask that you apologise, please.
Happy to apologise to anybody who's been offended by the post-truths that have come from the Conservative Party and anyone that has been offended by my remarks, Presiding Officer.
First Minister, I would ask that you apologise to myself and to this chamber.
I'm happy to apologise to the chamber for any offence caused, Presiding Officer.
We'll move on to question number 2, and I call Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, this is actually a very serious issue because it is important to people right across our communities. Because earlier this week, when I was in Cambuslang, I met a distressed woman trying to report a serious incident to the police. Her local station in Blantyre was closed, so she travelled several miles to Cambuslang, only to find the station there was also closed. Our conversation was a heartbreaking example of what a loss of local policing means for communities. And soon people all across Scotland will be faced with the same situation. Police Scotland being forced to consider closing 30 stations. So when will residents be told which local police stations are closing? And can the First Minister tell us why he approves of these plans to decimate the police presence in Scotland's communities?
First Minister.
Well, I'm afraid that's just another inaccuracy, Presiding Officer. We haven't approved the plans because the Cabinet Secretary or I haven't seen any finalised plans for the police estate in Lanarkshire. I go back to the answer that I gave to Douglas Ross. Police Scotland's estate strategy was published in 2019, published for everybody to see in 2019. It outlined plans to replace outdated and underused properties and replace them, and that is the key word, with modern fit-for-purpose spaces through consideration of a number of options, including co-location with partner organisations. What people in Scotland, what people in Rutherglen and Hamilton West will be interested to know is, are their communities safer? And the answer to that is absolutely, since the SNP has, of course, been in government. They want to know, are there sufficient police bobbies on the beat? There are, I'm pleased to say, an increase in police officer numbers since the SNP has taken power. So in terms of any changes to the estate, that is an operational matter for Police Scotland. What I'll continue to make sure is that Police Scotland is, of course, fairly funded.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, that woman that had to go to 2 police stations and still not be able to speak to a police officer doesn't feel any safer. And I think that's frankly a head-in-the-sand answer from the First Minister. But last month, the SNP's mismanagement of our police service was laid out in starker terms. Police Scotland say they'll need to lose another 600 police officers and 200 staff next year, and 2,000 staff over the next 4 years. That's on top of the 600 officers already lost. Frontline officers are being overworked, missing out on rest days and struggling with their mental health. And that means in parts of Scotland, the police are piloting, not investigating, some crimes. The Scottish Police Federation has warned people may die if further cuts go ahead. Their words, not mine. So why won't the First Minister listen to police officers serving on the front line, trying to keep our communities safe?
First Minister.
We do listen to police officers regularly, both myself, of course, the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs too. And Police Scotland have already recruited almost 600 officers this year alone, around just shy of 1,500 since the beginning of 2022. In terms of police officer numbers, I go back to the point I was making to Douglas Ross a moment ago. We have invested in Police Scotland. That's why we have more police officers here in Scotland than in England or indeed in Labour-run Wales. We also make sure that we invest in our police officers to ensure they're paid fairly. It's why they remain the best paid in every single comparable rank, the best paid in the entire UK, certainly in comparison to England and Wales, Presiding Officer. So we'll continue to invest in our police officers and our police service. It is, of course, an operational decision for the Chief Constable, who will determine how many officers they have in whatever role. I'll make sure, as the First Minister and the government that I lead, that we continue to invest significantly in police officers and indeed in Police Scotland right across the board.
Anna Sarwar.
The First Minister may not choose to believe the police, but I believe the police when they say they're worried about their resources and the loss of staff. Because, Presiding Officer, the first duty of any government is to keep its citizens safe. And when police are telling you communities are going to be put at risk, you should listen to them. But this is the direct result of 16 years of incompetence and mismanagement from the SNP. When Humza Yousaf was Justice Secretary, the police were stretched to breaking point. The words of the SNP MSP that some on those benches sitting behind the First Minister wished they had elected as leader. Because policing, like our NHS, like every Scottish institution, is weaker after 16 years of SNP failure. Presiding Officer, we can see it. The people sitting behind the First Minister can see it. And the people of Scotland can see it. So why can't he that it's time for change?
First Minister.
I tell you what, the backbenchers behind him certainly didn't seem to believe it, Presiding Officer. What I would say is that when it comes to the facts, since the SNP has been in government, recorded crime is at one of its lowest levels in almost 50 years. It's down 41%. Since we have assumed office, the SNP have assumed office, there's been a 53% fall in robbery, a 71% fall in housebreaking, a 65% fall in the theft of a motor vehicle, 70% fall in vandalism. So there has been a significant reduction in crime right across a number of crime types. And what I would say to Anas Sarwar is, of course, the funding situation of our public finances has been difficult, not because of the SNP, but because, of course, complete and utter economic mismanagement by the Conservatives. The difference between Anas Sarwar and I is I want to make sure that we have the power over our finances, and he wants to keep them in the hands of the Conservatives, Presiding Officer.
Question number 3, Maggie Chapman.
To ask the First Minister how the measures in place to tackle the climate emergency will also help to address poverty.
First Minister.
A fair and just transition to net zero means aligning our climate action to also address existing poverty and inequality across Scotland. A truly just transition to heat decarbonisation can help to reduce fuel poverty through measures such as tackling poor energy efficiency, which is why we're investing £1.8 billion on the heat transition over the course of this Parliament. Additionally, our ongoing support for public transport, especially our work to expand concessionary travel to under-22s and our just-launched peak fares pilot, demonstrates we're already taking very serious action to both alleviate poverty but also to cut emissions too. Fairness and equity will be a key consideration in the development of our just transition plans, and we're working with the Poverty Alliance and those with lived experience of discrimination, poverty and wider inequality to co-design these plans.
Maggie Chapman.
We have just had the hottest July on global records, then the hottest August, then the hottest September. Gobsmackingly bananas temperatures, according to climate scientists. A bit like Tory party conference this week, perhaps. And of course, Scottish Greens know that the systemic causes of the climate emergency also cause poverty and inequality. This Challenge Poverty Week, can the First Minister confirm that the work we do to make this shift from a carbon economy to a renewables economy, with policies like free bus travel for under-22s, an end to peak rail fares and so on, are all vital to the twin missions of tackling the climate emergency and tackling poverty, and that such policies are instrumental in building the clean, green, equal and caring economy we all so desperately need?
First Minister.
I agree with Maggie Chapman wholeheartedly, and I think anybody who pays attention to the science, which I think is most of us in this chamber, will see, of course, that climate injustice, climate action, the climate catastrophe, it does not impact us equally. Those who are poorer, the most vulnerable, those who live in areas of higher deprivation, are impacted more greatly by the climate catastrophe than others. So it's so important that we, of course, have a just transition. I put an emphasis on that word, just transition, to a low-carbon economy. That's absolutely vital in delivering our environmental obligations, but also, of course, our social and economic objectives as well. So, as I've said previously, we're clearly demonstrating that commitment through policies such as the £1.8 billion investment in heat transition and, indeed, expansion of free bus travel, and will continue to make sure we make progress in meeting our obligations for the planet, and importantly also for the people of Scotland too.
Ivan McKee.
Decarbonisation of our housing stock is critical to Scotland meeting its ambitious net zero targets. Yet residents are rightly concerned about the costs of installing new heating systems, which will far outweigh any government grant support available, and are often unsure about the range and applicability of the various technologies on offer. Does the First Minister agree with me that the most cost-effective way to decarbonise much of our existing housing stock may be through accelerating the deployment of district heating solutions, centralising much of the investment in technology choices and making the process of decarbonisation much easier and cheaper for homeowners?
First Minister.
Ivan McKee is absolutely right in his question. Heat networks will play a very important role in changing the way we heat our buildings. They could grow to meet around anywhere between 17 and 32% of our heat demand. It's also fair to say, of course, that it's going to be important for us to attract private investment into, of course, our decarbonisation journey, and that is something that is happening worldwide. And we have over the Atlantic, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act. Of course, over to the east in Europe, we have the Green Deal Industrial Partnership. But unfortunately, we have a UK government sitting on their hands, not taking action, not helping us to attract that private investment. And that's why we continue to demand that we have the full financial powers in order to attract that investment to Scotland to help us in our journey to net zero, Presiding Officer.
Paul Sweeney.
With an all-day bus ticket in Glasgow costing £5, I agree that free bus travel is both an environmental and social good. For people seeking asylum in Scotland who receive just £6 a day from the Home Office, public transport is simply not an affordable option. This Challenge Poverty Week, civil society organisations are calling for free bus travel to be extended to people seeking asylum. So will the First Minister confirm if his government will deliver this?
First Minister.
It's certainly an issue that this government is considering, and what I will say to Paul Sweeney is anything we can do within our powers to make the lives of asylum seekers easier, of course we will seek to do. Paul Sweeney knows well that we don't have those powers in our hands. They still lie in the hands of an inhumane Conservative government. I met with an asylum seeker yesterday who has been in the asylum system for 12 years, Presiding Officer, without the right to work. That, to me, is an absolute disgrace, and I know Paul Sweeney agrees with that. So, yes, I will consider the proposals around potentially seeing if we can seek to extend concessionary bus travel. We do that with the real limitations in our budget, but it is something that we'll give consideration to.
Thank you. Question number 4, Michelle Thomson.
To ask the First Minister what support the Scottish Government is providing to Creative Scotland.
First Minister.
The Scottish Government provides significant funding to Creative Scotland each year and will continue to do so. In 23-24, this financial year, this includes £27 million to support Creative Scotland's regularly funded organisations, £5.77 million for Creative Scotland's operating costs, £9.5 million for the Youth Music Initiative and £7.25 million for Screen Scotland and £2.5 million for festivals too.
Michelle Thomson.
I thank the First Minister for that response. There are considerable challenges in the arts and culture sectors. They and the Scottish Government struggle to operate in a post-pandemic, post-Brexit, high inflation and constrained budget environment not of our making in Scotland. Nevertheless, the scale of funding for the arts and culture sector is comparatively low at around 0.1% of our overall budget. And the Scottish Government set out its stall in creating a well-being economy, and the arts and culture sector are one of the primary contributors to this ambition. Will the First Minister and his Cabinet Secretary redouble their efforts to make sure the sector can be supported by whatever means possible over what will be undoubtedly further challenges in the years ahead?
First Minister.
Yes, I can. And Michelle Thomson makes some very important points in the question that she asks. Culture and the arts are important for, of course, the economic contribution that they make to this country, but they're also important for our other reasons too. They can absolutely be, and they will be, part of that well-being economy. We know, for example, when we think about social prescribing in the health space, that they can be exceptionally important. And of course, culture and arts are important intrinsically for their own sake and the joy that they bring to the people, not just of this country, but as we've seen, particularly over the summer, to people right across the world too. So I can give an absolute commitment that even when our finances are constrained, and of course we will ask Creative Scotland, as we will ask other public bodies to do, to sometimes help and assist, and if that necessarily means using their reserves, then we will ask them to do that. But we will look to support, as we have done over the years, our culture and arts, because they are so valuable to all of us in Scotland, and I would say valuable to the rest of the world too, Presiding Officer.
Donald Cameron.
Thank you. Last week's decision to reinstate a cut to Creative Scotland's budget of £6.6 million not only represents the complete reversal of a commitment made in February by the SNP, but it has also caused irreparable damage to the trust placed in this government by those working in culture and the arts. Laurie Anderson of Culture Counts has described it as beyond disappointing, a massive knock in confidence for the sector. What does the First Minister say to her and to the thousands of people working in the creative sector who feel completely let down by the mixed messages and broken promises of his government?
First Minister.
It's astonishing for Donald Cameron to talk about broken promises 24 hours after his government scrapped HS2, presiding officer. But also, does Donald Cameron never reflect? Does he never reflect when he stands up and asks us about the difficult financial circumstances we find ourselves in, that who have been the architects? His party have been the architects through their decimation of the public finances. And of course, it was Douglas Ross, his party leader, who demanded that we follow suit. Thank goodness we didn't. If we had done, we would have been facing far more severe financial pressure than we currently are. But let me make it absolutely clear, let me be unequivocal, that every single regularly funded organisation will continue to receive the funding that they were expecting this financial year. There will be no detriment to them, because we've asked Creative Scotland to use a portion of their £17 million reserves, a portion of those reserves, in order to help us with the financial challenges, and subject, of course, to parliamentary approval, we'll seek to restore that in the next financial year, Presiding Officer.
Neil Bibby.
The First Minister and Angus Robertson have claimed that a £6.6 million cut to Creative Scotland will have no detriment on cultural organisations this year. Yet it is quite obviously the case it will have a detriment of £6.6 million to the sector going forward. This Scottish Government promised in February to provide this essential funding, but has now broken that promise. The Cabinet Secretary has now given a gold-plated assurance that £6.6 million of funding will be given to Creative Scotland next year. Can I ask the First Minister to tell me what on earth this assurance is worth, when the last government assurance turned out to be worth absolutely nothing? And how does this cut match with the First Minister's own words last month, when he says the government values the role of the culture sector?
First Minister.
Neil Bibby really should have thought about revising his question after, of course, I already answered that very point in response to Donald Cameron. Because let me just explain it to Neil Bibby once again. Every single regularly funded organisation will receive the funding that they were expecting this financial year. There will be no detriment to them, because Creative Scotland, who have reserves of around about £17 million, are being asked to use a portion of those reserves in order to ensure there is no detriment. And subject to parliamentary approval,
let's hear the
and
First
I hope
Minister.
Now Neil Bibby's approval, that when it comes to next year's budget, we will make sure we restore that £6.6 million back into Creative Scotland's reserves. Presiding Officer.
Thank you. Question number 5, Sharon Dowey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government will take to tackle the reported rising rates of crime and antisocial behaviour at retail premises.
First Minister.
Well, the latest recorded crime data for shoplifting does show an increase. The levels do remain below pre-pandemic levels. However, I do absolutely recognise the disruption, the harm that's caused to businesses from theft and antisocial behaviour, and Police Scotland and partners are taking actions to tackle and to reduce it. The Scottish Government fully supports the innovative Scottish Partnership Against Acquisitive Crime, which is led by Police Scotland and includes a number of other organisations, of course, including retailers. Anyone affected by this kind of incident should report it to Police Scotland, who remain absolutely focused on keeping our communities safe from harm.
Sharon Dowey.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. I have met with various retailers in my area who have all discussed the challenges they're facing with rising crime and antisocial behaviour. This has escalated significantly over the last year and, in their words, is out of control. Police numbers are falling, police funding is stretched, and the Government's approach to justice is not working. First Minister, what action will you take to protect retail workers?
First Minister.
Well, what I would say to Sharon Dowey, obviously, in relation to her question, and I've said it to both Douglas Ross and Anna Sarwar, is that police officer numbers have increased since the SNP came into government. That, of course, recorded crime has reduced, and in fact, it's at one of its lowest levels in almost 50 years, and we have more police officers per head in Scotland than in England and in Wales. So we'll continue to invest in our police service. It's also worth noting, when you look at the figures, that over the past 10 years, from 2013-14 to 2022-23, there's been a 3% increase in shoplifting. I was very interested in the interview comments by Dr. Sinead Fury of Ulster University. She's a senior lecturer in consumer management and food innovation. She said, and I'll quote from her directly, "We've seen this before in previous times of austerity or economic downturn. The return of stealing to eat, instead of being able to afford to eat, is yet more proof that we need effective policy solutions that put sufficient income in people's hands in a dignified way, so that poverty and resorting to crime do not become a mainstream means of securing the most basic essentials of living." That is not a quote from me, it's a quote from a professor and an academic. Presiding officer of the Conservatives would do well to listen to that.
Question number 6, Katy Clark.
To ask the First Minister what assessment the Scottish Government has made of any impact of operational changes in the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service on response times to recent incidents, including the fires at Air Station Hotel and Kitty's nightclub in Kirkcaldy.
First Minister.
As I said last week, Presiding Officer, I want to thank our emergency services and partners for their response to these incidents, which were rightly an operational matter for Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. Both of these fires took place in derelict buildings with no risk to life. There were no casualties, thankfully, and they were not a rescue situation. At Station Hotel, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service deployed 15 appliances at the peak of the fire, and a decision was made not to tackle the blaze internally due to the building structure and to ensure firefighters were not placed at risk. The SFRS has confirmed that the recent operational changes did not impact on the outcome of the Station Hotel incident, and the Kirkcaldy fire took place before any of the operational changes came into effect.
Katy Clark.
I associate myself with the tribute that the First Minister has made to our firefighters, and he will be aware that the appliance at Kirkcaldy was taken out of operation at midnight later on the day of the fire. Is the First Minister aware of the serious concerns being raised by the Fire Brigade Union about the impact of withdrawal of 10 appliances last month, including the withdrawal of a specialist appliance at Ayr, which they say meant local firefighters had to wait for an appliance to arrive from Castle Milk, given the Kilmarnock one broke down? Will he meet with FBU Scotland to discuss their concerns about the impact of budget cuts on public safety?
First Minister.
Of course, the Cabinet Secretary regularly meets with the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and I'm sure would be pleased and happy to to meet with the FBU, who we have the utmost respect and regular engagement with too. In order to address some of the points that Katy Clark has made, let me just address the point around funding, despite very difficult financial circumstances that have been well rehearsed in this chamber, that we are providing the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service with more than £368 million this year. That's an increase of £14.4 million in comparison to last year. We're also continuing to invest in firefighters up and down the country. And as of March 2022, there were 11.3 firefighters per 10,000 of the population in Scotland. That's in stark contrast to 6.1 in England and 8.4 in Wales. So we'll continue to invest in the fire service. We'll continue to invest in our brave firefighters for the exceptional work that they do, and we'll continue to make sure that where, of course, that dialogue needs to continue with the fire service, with the Fire Brigade Union, we'll make sure that dialogue does continue, because we all want to see collectively a fire service that is well resourced and well equipped.
Audrey Nicholl.
Thank you. Can the First Minister outline what more can be done to take action against private owners who leave buildings derelict and at risk of antisocial behaviour, including fire raising, which has a significant impact on our councils and public services?
First Minister.
Audrey Nicholl raises a very important point. Indeed, Presiding Officer, derelict buildings are a blight on our communities. They can pose a risk, as we've seen, to the wider public. The best solution is, of course, for owners to actually maintain the property or dispose of it so it's not a drain on our public services. And the control of dangerous buildings is primarily the responsibility of local authorities, And under the Building Scotland Act 2003, councils can serve notices on owners to carry out the work, or they can secure the site and carry out the work themselves to make it safe, including, of course, right up to demolition. The police, local authorities and SFRS all work together to minimise the risks posed by derelict buildings, including the fact that the public can also play a part by reporting to Police Scotland, SFRS or indeed the local council any concerns that they have over derelict buildings that don't seem secure.
We move to general and constituency supplementaries, and I call Emma Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm sure the First Minister will have seen the No Life Half Lived report from Chest Heart Stroke Scotland, which makes a number of recommendations to enable access to rehabilitation support for 1 in 5 people in Scotland who live with chest, heart and stroke conditions, including in my South Scotland region. And just for transparency, I co-convene a number of health-related cross-party groups, including the Lung Health Cross-Party Group. Can the First Minister outline how the recommendations in the report align with the Scottish Government's stroke improvement plan?
First Minister.
I did read and I do welcome the Chest, Heart and Stroke Scotland report. It's a challenging report and rightly does challenge government in terms of where we can and should go further, and we will continue to engage, and Cabinet Secretary will engage with Chest, Heart and Stroke Scotland further in relation to the report. We are committed to ensuring that people who live with chest, heart and stroke conditions receive the best possible care. We have our stroke improvement plan that requires NHS boards to demonstrate provision of stroke rehabilitation in a variety of settings and a range of intensities. The plan also ensures boards must demonstrate a clear pathway for patients to re-engage with stroke rehabilitation services and offer a formal 6-month review to everyone who has had a stroke. But I will end where I started, Presiding Officer, and that is to say that I welcome the report and will continue to engage with Chest, Heart and Stroke Scotland to see how we continue to improve the patient experience.
Ros McCall.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Endometriosis Fife have advised me that the situation regarding waiting for gynaecological services in NHS Fife is appalling. Referrals for conditions such as endometriosis are having to wait over 63 weeks for treatment. That's a wait of 1 year, 3 months, not 3 months promised by this government. First Minister, what is the Scottish Government doing right now to address appalling waiting times from my constituents?
First Minister.
Ros McCall is, of course, right to raise this issue, and I'll ensure that the Cabinet Secretary for Health looks into the very specific matter that endometriosis Fife have raised in relation to that particular health board. Of course, we do have the Women's Health Plan, and we have made ambitious plans, and do have ambitious plans for reducing the far too long time it takes for diagnosis for women who do suffer from endometriosis and other such conditions. So I will ask the Cabinet Secretary for Health to write to Ros McCall on the very specifics of the issue in Fife and see what more we can do so that women in particular don't have to wait long for access to treatment, access to diagnosis, let alone access to treatment thereafter.
Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the First Minister support the downgrading of the neonatal intensive care unit at University Hospital Wishaw, or does he agree with experienced midwife Elsie Snedden that this would not just be a disaster for Lanarkshire, it will be a disaster for Scotland?
First Minister.
What I tend to do is believe the experts, believe the clinicians, believe those in the third sector who've often worked with young babies who often need that care. And of course, the model that is being placed here will ensure that we certainly believe, and clinicians certainly believe, will ensure that there is the best possible care for the sickest babies. And I'm more than happy for the Cabinet Secretary to write to Richard Leonard to furnish him with the detail. But as I say, we are rightly being led by the expert voice of clinicians, but also many of those in the third sector who also support these changes.
Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The peak fares removal pilot is another example of the Scottish Government's commitment to the role of sustainable transport, such as rail travel, in achieving our net zero targets. Can I ask the First Minister what this initiative could mean for emissions reduction?
First Minister.
It could be absolutely significant. We hope to have more people on our railway services, as I said in response to a question from Maggie Chapman, and I'm delighted that there has been such positivity to this government funding ScotRail for that 6-month pilot to abolish peak fares. And it's been welcomed by many people, of course, this week who have been using ScotRail, have been using our railways, and it is very much part of the pilot, and the evaluation of the pilot excuse me, will be to calculate the savings in CO2 emissions generated by removing car journeys from Scotland's road. And I think it is a very stark contrast, a stark tale, Presiding Officer, of two governments. In Scotland, we have a government that's cutting rail fares. In, of course, the UK, we have a Conservative government that is cutting railway lines, Presiding Officer.
Tess White.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, further design faults have once again delayed the completion of the Baird Family Hospital and the Anchor Centre in Aberdeen. The projects are now 3 years late and over almost £100 million over budget, with costs expected to rise further. Has the First Minister met with NHS Grampian to discuss these deeply concerning delays, and what financial support will the Scottish Government provide to the Health Board to ensure these much-needed projects can go ahead?
First Minister.
Well, look, what I would say, and Tess White again is right to raise the challenges around these two projects. What I would say is the entire purpose of setting up NHS Assure was to help to assure all of us in relation to capital projects that were being undertaken, and of course those capital projects were meeting the high standards that we would all expect for all of our capital projects, but in particular for NHS projects, much like the Anchor Centre and the Baird Family Hospital. So NHS Assure is doing its job. It has raised, as Tess White has rightly said, some concerns and some issues which need rectified. Of course, the Cabinet Secretary will remain close, as we will, as a government, remain close to the Health Board, and I'm more than happy to ensure that Tess White is kept up to date in relation to those discussions.
Carol Mockin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Yesterday, EIS members attended the Scottish Parliament with a letter for the First Minister. It read, and I quote, "Compulsory redundancies are already a reality in Scotland's college sector. To continue to allow the abandonment of the Scottish Government's own no public sector redundancy policy in the further education sector is nothing short of a betrayal of hard-working staff. Will the First Minister accept that compulsory redundancy are now a reality on his watch? And in this Challenge Poverty Week, can he explain how treating the college sector with such disdain is compatible with supporting it to continue being a route out of poverty for those living in our most vulnerable communities?
First Minister.
I can say, of course, the Government will respond to the EIS more formally and other trade unions, but we've been clear, of course, these are discussions that are taking place between the employer and the colleges and, of course, trade unions. But in any discussion that the Minister for Higher and Further Education has had, and he's communicated this both face-to-face but also in writing, he's made it abundantly clear, of course, that the guiding light should be our fair work principles. These are principles that are important to me as First Minister, principles that are important to the entire government. So I would certainly urge those college principals, those who are negotiating on behalf of the employer, to make sure they do everything they can to ensure that they are guided by those fair work principles.
Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Orkney Islands Council has called for the Scottish Government's National Islands Plan to be scrapped after, quote, little or no progress has been made on its 13 objectives, notably the inconsistencies in Island Authority funding and improvement of lifeline transport links. Does the First Minister not accept that a more tightly focused plan would offer more chance of objectives being met, rather than the Scottish Government continuing to overpromise and underdeliver for Orkney and other island communities?
First Minister.
Well, we've invested significantly in our island communities, and of course I'm always happy to speak to the leader of Orkney Island Council. In fact, we were engaged in conversation at COSLA's conference just last week. So, of course, I don't think there's merit in scrapping the National Islands Plan. What we have to ensure we do, from the Scottish Government perspective, is make good on the commitments that are in that plan, and we're absolutely committed to doing that. And one example I'll give Liam MacArthur is in my last conversation with the leader of Orkney Island Council, of course, reaffirmed the fact that the Government is very open, in the spirit of the Verity House Agreement, considering models such as a single island authority. Let's have that conversation. Let's have that discussion about what the art of the possible is. And of course, this government has made significant commitments when it comes to the funding and assisting of funding to inter-island ferries. So we'll continue to continue those discussions, continue that engagement, not just with Orkney Island Council, but with all of our island local authorities too.
John Mason.
Thank you. The First Minister is obviously aware of the cancellation of HS2, or a large part of it, by the Conservatives, who are clearly only interested in London and the south east of England. Will this have any impact on Scotland, for example, our climate targets, and the fact that it will be more difficult to take rail travel through and to England?
First Minister.
Undoubtedly, that will be the case. The Scottish Government has always strongly supported a high-speed rail programme that benefits Scotland, yet it's quite clear that this latest UK Government decision, this latest broken promise, will negatively impact on Scotland's ambition for net zero, for our economy, for enhancing our rail capacity, and indeed for our connectivity. We need to take time to fully understand the implications of the impact of the cancellation of HS2 and to consider the significant impact the cancellation of this project will have on our economy, but also, really importantly, on our climate change targets too. And it goes without saying that long-distance rail travel in the UK will now continue to struggle to compete with domestic air travel. This will not help us deliver on those important climate change targets that we must achieve. And I just reflect back on the fact that during his posting on X, or formerly known as Twitter, the Prime Minister put up a map saying that he'll be investing in the north. That map, of course, excluded almost entirely Scotland. I think it managed to go up to Stranraer and excluded the rest of Scotland. And so forget investing in Scotland. The Tories can't even find Scotland on the map, Presiding Officer.
And Sue Webber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, on the subject of rail travel, I've been made aware that ScotRail have made provision in their timetable for trains between Edinburgh and Dunblane to allow it to stop at Winchborough. When will Winchborough get its station, First Minister?
First Minister.
We have an excellent record, of course, in investing in the rail infrastructure. It is remarkably brave of the member to stand up here to talk about rail investment, and some might use a different word, Presiding Officer, but remarkably brave to stand up here 24 hours after the Prime Minister has scrapped HS2. So I will ensure that the member gets the detail of our rail infrastructure. But as I've already said, it is a tale of two governments. We have invested this week in cutting rail fares, while, of course, the Conservatives have cut railway lines right up and down this country.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. Point of order, Stephen Kerr.
Presiding Officer, I didn't raise a point of order during FMQs because I understand it's the convention of Parliament not to do so. But in your exchanges with the First Minister, when he was asked to apologise to you and the member that he falsely accused of lying, he did neither. So what steps will be taken to tackle the First Minister's willful disrespect of your office and this Parliament?
I thank Mr Kerr for his point of order. I dealt with the matter at the time, Mr Kerr. We will now move on to members' business, which is a debate in the name of John Swinney, and there will be a short suspension to allow those leaving the chamber.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please, subscribe to and share our channel, or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.